Our speaker today, it's a great pleasure to introduce him, is our state senator, 36th District, which covers Greenwich, Stanford, New Canaan, parts of those three cities. And he's a Republican, and he was elected in a special election August last year when the former state senator, Alex Kasser, resigned. And now Ryan was reelected in November, and he is in his first full term as a senator. He has a background in economics. He was a major there at Northwestern University, and he went into the commodities business. Today he works for a growth firm in management, and has particular expertise in the energy sector. He's also on the Energy Efficiency Committee in Greenwich today. So Ryan is going to talk about the economy, local control, and other issues that are important to Connecticut citizens. Brian, do I see you?
Yes.
Good.
To your right.
Right there. Okay. And I like the title of his talk. He calls it Creating a Better Future, a Brighter Future for Connecticut. Ryan Fazio.
Thank you, sir. Nice to see you all. Irf, I've known for many years. It's a great honor to be here at the RMA. The RMA's programming and speakers and guests are always second to none. I've been watching them for years online. And so attending this, giving a speech after Governor Lamont, seeing my friend Dwight Chapin, who is in the Nixon administration, on the list of future speakers for the memoir he wrote in his time with the president, and many other very notable speakers. My first instinct when I was asked to speak was, who canceled? But nonetheless, it is my great honor. And I wanted to come to speak about, I think, a very important topic, and the reason I ultimately ran for office for the state Senate, which is how can we charter a better future for Connecticut? It could be similar in its substance to what State Representative Meskers and Governor Lamont spoke to you about in recent weeks. But I did make a note not to watch their talks. I will watch it subsequent to mine because I wanted it to stand on its own. I didn't want to be specifically addressing their remarks, but I wanted my assessment of Connecticut and its state government and what we can do to make it better to stand on its own. After the pandemic and in an election year, Connecticut is at an important crossroads with enormous challenges facing it, but also enormous opportunities. So I think that Connecticut should do nothing short of aiming to be the most desirable place in the most desirable country to build a life, to work, and to raise a family. But in order to do so, we need to confront reality. Connecticut has been hurting for a long time, and it's been hurting in large part because of the failure of leadership. So we need to bring a new style of leadership and major change to our state government that does four things at least. First, make Connecticut prosperous and affordable for all families. Second, make Connecticut schools the best in the entire nation. 3, protect the public safety. And 4, protect our neighborhoods, local control of our towns, traditions, and freedoms. My stipulation, however, is that Connecticut cannot afford to continue going in the wrong direction or even change gears to neutral. It must actively change direction and change policy in order to create hope and opportunity, contentment, and yes, even excitement in Connecticut. We cannot just have cosmetic policy changes on the edges or a change in attitude, but we need real change in governance and leadership in order to make our state the most desired place to be in the entire country, in the entire world. So the good news is we approach this problem, we approach these challenges with all the fundamental attributes that are necessary to succeed. Our state, and especially our area here in southwestern Connecticut and Greenwich and the surrounding areas, have unmatched built-in advantages, totally unmatched. We have high-skilled, educated, and conscientious workforce. The rate of bachelor's degrees in our population in the state is the third highest in the country. The rate of advanced degrees is the fifth highest in the country. We have natural beauty, of course, from our shoreline to our bucolic towns, to our lakes in the Northwest, the rolling hills of the countryside across Connecticut, in New England. It's, again, second to perhaps none. We have prime location. We're between the greatest city in the world and another important city with a heinous baseball team. It should be clear that the first is New York and the second is Boston. And of course, most importantly, we have strong community. We have strong community. We have good people with big hearts. Never was that more evident than 2 years ago during the pandemic, when people were suddenly at risk for a novel disease, a once-in-a-100-year disease, but they always stepped up and they asked how they could help their neighbors, how they can help other people in need before they even asked how could they protect themselves. Other good news is that we have regional strength, I think, within the state. Here in Fairfield County, there is actually population growth in the past 10 years. We have some momentary fiscal relief due to the inflation. Inflation helps debtors, and Connecticut's a debtor state, so it alleviates some of the fiscal pressures on us. We have momentary fiscal relief, of course, from the federal government sending aid to the states. And I think out of COVID, with our high vaccination rate, Connecticut is well geared to confront the endemic stage of the disease. But nonetheless, we have deep-seated challenges because of a failure of leadership and policy. The bad news is that our state's economy is crushing the middle class and has for a long time. It's unaffordable to live here. The public services should be better. Our state should be safer. And our traditions and freedoms and local democracy should be better protected. So I think that brings me to why that is the case and what we can do about it. First and foremost, if we do not have an economy in this state that creates jobs, that ensures affordability, that creates opportunity for all people from top to bottom, everything else will be in jeopardy. Connecticut's economy has been failing the middle class for a long time. Over the last 10 years, we have the fourth lowest rate of economic growth. We have the sixth highest unemployment rate. We have the fourth lowest rate of population growth. Over the last 30 years, we've seen the lowest appreciation of home values of any state, and we've seen the highest increase in poverty since 1990. That was the year before the income tax was implemented in Connecticut, and I don't think that's a coincidence. The reasons for these trends, I don't think would be a surprise to many people. We have the second highest taxes in the country. A new report from Wallet Hub was just released this morning that said exactly that the Connecticut middle class faces the second highest tax burden in the country. We have the second highest debt burden after, I think, Illinois. That's bonded debt and unfunded liabilities related to state employees. And we have the strictest regulatory structure, the most punitive regulatory structure to small businesses in the country, according to the Cato Institute. So when you consider the context of how our economy is doing, it's actually miraculously impressive that small businesses and entrepreneurs and middle-class families and workers are keeping their heads above water here in Connecticut when the state government has been so punitive towards them over many years. So what should we do about it? We need a 180. We need a change in direction that actually encourages job creation in our state, that encourages work and investment and economic growth, that ensures fiscal responsibility, that removes the burden on small businesses that are the backbone of our economy, that ensures higher demand for labor, wage growth, and economic opportunity for all. The state's income tax system and tax system writ large needs to be reformed wholesale. It is convoluted, complicated. It benefits people who have lobbyists and accountants and can navigate its complexities rather than regular people who don't have the same privileges. There's $9 billion of what are called tax exemptions, special tax deductions and credits in the code. that target specific industries that politicians seem to prefer. But the overall income tax burden and property tax burden in our state is among the highest in the country. And overall, that discourages people from living here, from working here, from creating jobs here. And it limits economic growth almost to zero. This is an easy reform. It needs to be at least explored and should be implemented, and could, I think, easily been implemented in Connecticut. You could see the income tax eliminated for the working poor, cut substantially for the middle class and people making more, 2 or 3%. This should not be a difficult reform to make. The math adds up, but it would be enormously positive to growth and job creation and opportunity. We need to cut the red tape that is killing small businesses. When I talk to small businesses in our area, to a T, they say they're struggling. None says it's easy to do business here. Finding labor is difficult. Navigating the regulatory structure is difficult. Paying the taxes is difficult. The decline in demand from limited population growth makes things difficult. At minimum, the state government should be a supporter of their cause, not an inhibitor to them doing business, creating jobs, and providing goods and services to people. It's not tolerable that Connecticut has the most punitive regulatory structure in the country. We need to cut red tape. In the past 6 years, the Labor Committee of the state legislature has passed into law 28 different workforce mandates that, again, destroy demand for labor and hurt small businesses. They are considering 30 new workplace mandates in this legislative session alone. Enough is enough. My goodness, when will it stop? I rarely see an instance where they actually consider removing or examining something that isn't working, that is hurting small businesses. And of course, now we're all aware of the horrible rate of inflation that is crushing people, especially those on fixed incomes, including seniors and low-wage workers. The problem is, on one hand, there are global markets that we cannot alter in a significant way that drive a lot of the inflation, but the state government and the state government's policies has, over a long period of time, made Connecticut unaffordable. It's exacerbated the problem. And so actually doing cost-benefit on the regulations that are hurting small businesses, reducing harmful regulations that increase the cost of healthcare. The cost of healthcare is one of the biggest problems that small businesses face. A small business owner in Stamford, whose door I knocked on in my last election, said that he and his family have to pay something like $60,000 out of pocket before their insurance kicks in, and he has a pre-existing condition. That's in spite of the fact that under law, pre-existing conditions are protected, or so-called protected. It's really difficult to operate a small business in this state. It's really difficult, therefore, to be a low or middle wage worker in this state, because the more difficult it is to do business, especially as a small business, then the demand for labor is lower, the number of jobs is lower, the wages are lower, and opportunity is vanquished. Electricity and energy prices are the highest in the continental U.S. in Connecticut. That can change with an all-of-the-above energy policy that incorporates all types of affordable energy, protects the environment, and reduces the inhibitions to the barriers to delivering affordable energy to the middle class in Connecticut as well. So it's almost as if in Connecticut, the state government was doing everything possible within its power to reduce economic opportunity. With wholesale change, we can create that economic growth that lifts everybody up, especially those who are most in need. It's not acceptable that Connecticut has fewer jobs today than it did in 1997, which is a shocking statistic. But it can be different. It can be different with even a modest improvement in our state leadership. But it has to start now. Cosmetic changes on the margin are not acceptable. And so the state government, the leadership of the state government needs a change in attitude, or it needs to be changed itself. Second, Connecticut schools should be made the best in the country. They can be. We have all the resources necessary to accomplish that. I don't think we're quite there yet. Most of the nationwide testing shows Connecticut is, around 10th in its test scores, but it also, with one of the most educated workforces in the country, I think the standard should be even higher. I think the demographics say that we should have even higher test scores than that. We spend the second most per pupil on our public schools in the entire country. And of course, the United States spends a lot per pupil on public education compared to the rest of the world. But our results are just not quite as good as I think they could be. Our kids should be the priority, and they should especially be the priority out of COVID, where we see academic achievement falling through the floor, 10% decline, generally speaking, in proficiency in math and reading, many days lost in school, a rise in mental health problems, a reduction in socialization because a lot of the public health restrictions over the last 2 years. So there should be sort of a Marshall Plan for how to improve the lot for kids in this country, but especially in this state. And the way to do it is actually examining how we improve academic outcomes and bringing reform and scaling that reform in a way that improves the quality of public education for everyone, prioritizes actual learning and academic achievement. And I don't think we have to look very far for the models for doing so. A couple of years ago, with great interest, I was listening to a RMA speech by the principal of Western Middle School, Gordon Beinstein, who spoke about the extensive changes that he's made in the 7 or 8 years he's been principal at Western Middle School. It was especially of interest to me because I'm an alumnus of Western Middle School, and I love the school, and I want to see it succeed. It's one of the most interesting and diverse student bodies in the entire state. And under his leadership, the test scores have gone from about 150th in the state to 60th in the state in just a few short years. And I would bet you a lot of money that they'll continue to improve. Just a few miles down the road off exit 7, there's a charter school called the Stanford Charter School for Excellence. It's 99% non-white. It's 75% free and reduced lunch, so low-income kids. And if it was its own standalone elementary school district, it would have the second highest test scores of any school district in the entire state after New Canaan and ahead of Westport. It only is funded $11,500 per student because of the charter school funding formulas in the state, compared to, I think, the citywide average of about $18,000. Yet this school is probably the best school in the entire state, pound for pound, when you look at it. But at no point, I don't think any major leader in the state has gone to them and says, what are you doing? And how can we copy it? How can we scale this? How can we make the quality of public education across Connecticut on par with the quality of education you're delivering it, and therefore make Connecticut one of the leaders in public education in the world? But that hasn't been done. It was difficult for them to even get permission to expand to the 6th grade when they asked permission from the State Department of Education. It took them, I think, a year or two. That's unacceptable. We should be identifying the leaders like Western Middle School and the Stanford Charter School for Excellence in education in Connecticut, learning from them and scaling those reforms. Finally, we should look to other leaders in the Northeast in public education. So in Massachusetts in the 1990s, they embarked on an ambitious education reform, a bipartisan education reform that ultimately 10, 15 years later resulted in Massachusetts year after year after year having the highest test scores in verbal and math in the entire country, which had basically never been achieved before. That one state consistently saw the top academic outcomes in the entire country. And there are also some important inner-city charter schools in New York, in Massachusetts, in Texas, in Florida, and elsewhere that have been leaders in providing education and opportunity to kids who need them the most. I've seen it myself, spending 7 years volunteering in inner-city schools in the Bronx. The amount of joy and hope those kids, who might not otherwise have that opportunity, were given because of the high quality of education that was delivered to them. I believe in the KIPP schools where I volunteered, the low-income kids who predominated the student body were 4 or 5 times more likely to go to college than similar kids in the Bronx. Now, the question is, what are all those different schools and educational leaders doing? Well, a lot of it is pretty common. There's a lot of overlap between what all of those leaders credit their success to. They credit it first and foremost to high standards. We expect that every kid can succeed. We refuse, to borrow a phrase, the soft bigotry of low expectations. We're going to have, therefore, a rigorous curriculum focused on core curriculum. The 3 R's should not be considered outmoded. Reading, writing, and arithmetic should be the priorities in schools. There should be more instruction time. That means more days in school during the year, more hours of instruction during the day, and a high dosage of tutoring for the kids who are falling behind. That should be an especial focus in light of COVID. That's where I think a lot of our extra education, temporary educational aid dollars should go, to tutoring for kids who have fallen behind. We should have data-driven operations in our schools. So that means we should look at what works and try to replicate it, look at what isn't working and try to fix it. That's how every other part of life works. It can be scaled on the school level as well. And we need constant feedback. For teachers, what are you doing well? This is what you're doing well. This is what you're not doing well. Same thing for students. There needs to be evaluations so we can track how kids are doing, give them feedback, put them on the right path, and make sure that they could succeed fabulously. This has been done in some of the most unlikely places. So it can be done all across Connecticut. We can make Connecticut a leader if we focus on academic outcomes, education reform statewide, as has been done in Massachusetts, in New York City, and here in our backyard in Western Middle School and Stanford Charter School for Excellence. Third, we need to fulfill our state government's most important responsibility, which is protect the public safety. That's especially important, again, to protect some of our most vulnerable neighborhoods and populations. In the past couple of years, we have seen a striking rise in violent crime, especially in homicides in Connecticut. In 2020, the number of homicides rose 31% in Connecticut, which was more than the nationwide average. And in the 2 biggest cities with available data for 2021, the homicide rate rose 34%. It's no coincidence that this occurred in the aftermath of a major policing overhaul in the summer of 2020 in Connecticut, which was perhaps even unique across the country. It tied the hands of police officers and imposed new liability on local police. It made things much more difficult and banned important proactive policing policies that are especially vital for getting illegal guns off the street and stopping some of these shootings and violent crime. But also, our criminal justice laws need to be reformed to discourage young people from going down the wrong path early in life, into gang life, into a life of crime. I was speaking to a local detective from one of our local cities the other day, and they identified that one of the kids they had arrested for, and by kid I mean a 17-year-old, they had arrested for stealing a car, was actually his 31st arrest, and they alerted the police department, his home police department, I think it was Bridgeport, of the situation, and they said, what's the difference booking him a 32nd time? He's already been booked 31 times, and we can't do anything about it. The status of our criminal justice laws in this state are such that we cannot have any recourse against young men who are going down the wrong path and telling them that this is not the right way, to the point that parents are literally begging police departments to try to get their kids under control. But of course, law enforcement has no ability to do so. We need a balance between mercy and justice. We need to put vulnerable kids in vulnerable communities on the right path and discourage them from going down the wrong one. This will save their lives, most importantly, down the road, because engaging in this sort of life of crime probably poses the greatest danger to them themselves. We can do far better to protect the public safety in Connecticut with common sense type reforms. Finally, we need to protect our most valuable traditions here in this state of local control, personal freedom. The efforts to overhaul and overturn our ability to have local control of our towns, especially around planning and zoning, including around education, are, I think, a deep affront to many people across Connecticut. Common sense people who look around and say that I trust my local leadership, they're doing a good job, they have my ear, they have my best interests in mind. Why would I turn over more power to this state government and state leadership who has consistently failed regular people time and time again in Connecticut? What have they done to earn more power and more trust at the expense of our local governments? On the issue of planning and zoning, we can have a balanced approach here locally that advances affordable housing goals and protects the town's interests across the board, that makes sure that we develop affordable housing that's in the scale and in the scope of our town. These efforts in Hartford to double down on 830G, double the requirement on our towns to ensure basic as-of-right development in certain areas, and so on, are not acceptable. I don't think they're acceptable to people across the aisle, and they're a deep affront to our great tradition here in New England of local control, of local democracy, of a town hall style of government that's perhaps best represented by the RTM in this town, which is the third largest legislative body in the entire country. And I've been on the RTM, I'm sure many of you have as well. For all its faults, it seems like Greenwich does work pretty well. And it's still a desirable place to be because it has good leadership and has over many years. So the bad news is that we face immense challenges as a state. The good news is it's a management problem. It's a policy problem, and it can be changed. Our fundamental strengths are deep-seated. Our people are good. And I believe that this state could succeed like never before with a positive change. Connecticut is a great state with a horrible state government. And with positive change, I am confident that it could succeed like never before. This is the time to make those reforms, to aim big, to be ambitious. We shouldn't settle for mediocrity. We shouldn't settle for second best, certainly not 49th best. We should aim to make Connecticut the most desirable place to live and work and raise a family in the entire country and in the entire world. We can do it. The time is now. And so hopefully the years to come are a time of reform and change and growth for our state. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ryan. We'll take questions from left to right. We'll go back and forth. And I'll ask the speakers to stand and to face, maybe on an angle, both the camera and Ryan. So who has the first question?
Hi, Ryan. Thank you for coming today, and thank you for your talk. My question has to do with the labor pool. I am the past chairman of the Human Services Department, the chairman of the Rehab Committee for the Blind, and the biggest issues, or the two biggest issues that come to low-income or even beginning workers is transportation and childcare. And if you go down the Post Road, you don't even see bus shelters in our town to support people who want to take public transportation. The cost of gas is too high. Mm-hmm. The ability to buy a car, a running car, a safe car, has gone through the roof. How do we get people back to work, to all of these small businesses that are looking for people, if we don't solve those problems?
That's a great question, Alan, and thank you for it. We need to confront the cost of living problem writ large. As you say, energy, gasoline, automobiles, and so on. There are ways, I think, as I outlined in the speech, that Connecticut public policy can change to accomplish that. On transportation, we need to make sure that we are investing the tax dollars that we spend in Connecticut in the highest value projects, meaning that the projects that will do the most good for regular people. I think Connecticut has failed to do that over 10 years. We obviously, in this part of the state, send such a disproportionate amount of the funding to the state government. We see very little return to those dollars. I think to some extent we expect that. But the infrastructure here is critical, and I think it's been underfunded compared to the rest of the state. Metro North has gotten slower. 95 can be a nightmare. The roads, especially in Stamford, boy, it's like going on a country road how poorly it's paved. So we need to make sure that the state government is investing, is spending on a cost-benefit basis that maximizes value for regular people. So I think the ample money that we send to Hartford should be focused on what has the highest return. I think that means Metro North, 95, major population centers, major centers of economic growth like southwestern Connecticut. And it's a major thumb in the eye of people down here who are struggling when we spend $1 billion on a new passenger train line from New Haven to Springfield, Massachusetts, as we did 5 years ago. That ends up subsidizing every single ride to the tune of about $145 per ride because so few people ride it. But of course, it's a big ribbon that politicians get to cut, and it's a good headline. But it doesn't really it doesn't really help regular middle-class people. It contributes to the neglect of infrastructure that is vital, especially down here, which in the economic engine of the state. And then there's also improvements we can make to some of the regulations surrounding construction and infrastructure that make it exorbitantly expensive to build here compared to other parts of the country, compared to other parts of the world. Project labor agreements have been estimated to inflate the cost of building infrastructure in the Northeast by as much as 30%. That means fewer schools, that means lower quality schools, that means lower quality roads and public transportation, and so on. So there's also, I think, rules around construction that could be changed to improve the quality and improve the quantity of infrastructure in the state.
Thank you, Ryan. 2 questions, very different questions. One, would you tell us specifically what you would do to try to bring down the cost of electricity, specifically? Second disparate question is you mentioned education, and you mentioned the state and trying to get the state to become a leader of it, but then you talk about local control. How do you reconcile that?
Two very good questions. Tough questions, but very good questions. First, I would do threefold on the electricity. First, we need to separate the Consumer Protection Agency from the environmental and political agency of the state. That's pretty in the weeds, but basically the Consumer Protection Agency of the state government, PURA, should be a standalone agency that's empowered within our state government, not subordinate to other political considerations at DEEP, which is the Department of Environmental and Energy Protection. So we need to empower the Consumer Protection Agency to represent us, the ratepayers, against the utilities. Second, I think we need an all-of-the-above clean energy approach. The way that the renewable portfolio standard in our state works is it's very clunky, it's very siloed. It separates all different forms of renewable and green energy from one another. It should basically be all considered on par with one another, so it's easier to discover and deliver and develop the best forms of renewable energy. We can also reform the way solar is developed and delivered in Connecticut. So we have community solar. That means that we give the same treatment to more large-scale solar developments in the state that we do residential or municipal solar electricity. So those are the 3 things I would do. On the transportation side, our Republican caucus announced a plan to temporarily suspend the gas tax into the summer to abate some of the pain of inflation that people are feeling. It seems like the governor is in support of that plan as of a day or 2 ago. So I think in the short run that would also help. On the school side, you make a very important point. So I don't even know how many unfunded state mandates through our honor school districts in Connecticut. So now on one hand, the efforts to regionalize our school districts for Hartford to take more control over our schools, I think are a non-starter. They're totally unreasonable, and they inspired, I think, bipartisan objections in 2019 when they were kind of brought to the front. But more subtly, as you point out, there's probably hundreds of unfunded state mandates on our local schools that when I talk to principals locally, they say it actually does take up their time, and their most valuable time could be spent in the classroom with their teachers, learning and giving feedback from how instruction is being done. That isn't to say that the state should have no influence over how public education is delivered on a local level. It should. There does need to be state influence and state regulations around the delivery of school, but they should be limited and they should be focused on delivering high quality academic outcomes, not on hundreds of different ancillary items that require principals to be doing hours of paperwork every month. So it requires precision. It requires we scale down. We first of all take an account of the hundreds of unfunded mandates that we have on local schools. We pick out the ones that are the most superfluous, eliminate them, and make sure that the ones that do exist are focused on delivering high quality instruction and core curriculum to all kids across the state.
There may not be very many people that know that your dedication to public service goes back a long time. I'm one of those. And thank you for that, and thank you for doing what you're doing. Mine is a gut check question for you. With an R next to your name, and with many of the policies that have been developed within the state that you commented on that may not be the best policies for tomorrow, what gives you the sense that as an R that you're going to be able to facilitate change?
When I've learned a lot since I first decided to run for office a few years ago. And one of the things I learned is that I think the regular voter, the average median voter who ultimately decides elections, is making an earnest effort to decide who can do the best job at advancing their interests and the interests of their community. That it's a very traditional view of civics. I think in our cynical world of ideological and partisan people yelling at each other over cable news, it's unappreciated or it's neglected. But fundamentally, I think that's how elections are decided. I think regular voters, the average voter, especially around here, is trying to inform themselves and make the best decision possible about who they believe can do the best job in office with their hand on the till, advancing the interests of their community. So I've actually become less cynical and more optimistic about our possibilities in the 2 years I've been in this. I don't know that I actually expected that. Most people, it seems like they get into politics and they become more cynical. In the past 2 years, I've become more optimistic because I think that regular people are trying to find what the right answer is. I think that's especially true in our part of the country, in our part of the state. I mean, the statistics are there in front of you. I ran 24 points ahead in terms of margin, 24 points ahead of the Republican candidate at the top of the ticket in 2020. People here are willing to make an individual decision based on who they think will do the best job, apart from party. It's something I appreciate very much about our community, and it's something that I think applies to the state as a whole. Even though it is a blue state, we have elected Republican governors before. In 2017 and 2018, the state Senate was tied at 18, and even though the Democratic lieutenant governor had a tiebreaker over the Senate, it was the Republican budget that was passed that imposed a volatility cap that created a rainy day fund, which is bearing dividends for us even to current day. So I understand that the odds to some extent are stacked against what I'm talking about, the reforms I'm talking about. But I think there is a lot of reason for hope, and there is never justification for giving up.
I've heard over the years from a number of you folks that run for office that you're going to fix 95 and you're going to fix Metro North. I commuted on Metro North for 40 years. The only thing they ever did to that thing was put new cars on it. They never banked the tracks, so you couldn't go more than 40 miles an hour or 30 miles an hour. You built 95 right through the center of towns. You can't widen it. You can't do anything to it. I don't understand where everyone is saying, we got to fix 95. We got to fix the railroad. How would you do it? Specifically, how would you do it?
Yep. So first of all, I think we need to end project labor agreements in our state government, which, as I said before, can increase the cost of construction by 30% and basically excludes us from using 80% of the state's construction labor force. Totally unreasonable regulations that hurt regular residents, that hurt taxpayers. I think we should look to creative ways to speed up Metro North. In order to speed up Metro North, there's a lot of talk about straightening the tracks, but you could do it by something called super re-elevating the tracks. So you can increase the elevation of one side of the tracks, which has the same effect as straightening the tracks, but could be hundreds of millions of dollars cheaper to do so. I think the rules around it's funny you mentioned the train cars. The rules around acquisition of train cars, I forget. I read an essay about it like 2 years ago, but they're so strict. And basically, we end up spending so much more on train cars than any reasonable person would expect us to do because of some of the rules that surround the train tracks. And again, I think the project labor agreement thing would apply to improving the quality of the roads. In terms of traffic on 95, I don't have an answer to that, but it seems to me that if you improve some of the choke points on the exits from exit 2 to exit 9, which is an absolute disaster in parking lot oftentimes.
But you're still going to have those 3,000, 4,000 cars. And one of the reasons you do have them is when you get off a train, is there any transportation to the back? Look at Stanford. Most of the buildings are in the back there. Norwalk's the same way. Greenwich has a number of people in the back. You don't have public transportation. That's forcing people to drive. That's what's killing your roads. And there's no solution. Is there public transportation going to be involved in this?
You mean buses?
Buses or something, yes.
Well, there's a lot of buses in Greenwich and Stamford especially. I often see them fairly empty, unfortunately. I don't know that I have a great answer on how to improve the bus service locally. It's something that I probably need to learn more about, but I don't have a good answer on it. I've thought a little bit more about the trains, and I think there is a positive answer on it. I don't think it's acceptable that over 50 years the train service has slowed down. But of course, in this new post-COVID world, it's also possible that the demand for public transportation is going to go down. Hopefully, the usage of the roads will also go down as fewer people commute. Maybe that's a silver lining. But the amount of waste in our infrastructure in Connecticut, it really is mind-boggling. The projects that were embarked upon over the last 10 years were so wasteful. It's absolutely scandalous and unbelievable. The Hartford line. The fact that it subsidizes the average rider in excess of $100 per ride, the fact that the New Britain busway was built out of nothing, it subsidizes, goes from New Britain to Hartford. Everyone in Hartford, now that I've been up there for 6 months or 9 months, jokes about how it's Dan O'Malloy's bus line and that there's no one ever riding it. It subsidizes the average rider, I think $30 or $40 per ride. It's a bus. And it subsidizes the average rider $30 or $40 per ride. And according to the National Association of State Budget Offices, Connecticut spends like the most, I think, in the continental U.S. per capita on transportation infrastructure. There's so much waste in the state government, especially in this area, and I think that's where a lot of the answers lie. Some of them, I have stronger opinions than others about how exactly to fix it, but that's basically my answer.
Ryan, thanks a lot for coming. It's nice to see a young man from Greenwich High School that is trying to help out, especially with common sense approach. And it's good to see young people coming forward. Thank you. My question is, what recommendation would you give to the RTM for, as I see it, an overpopulation, an over building of 830Rs. There's one coming up in apparently Church Street. There's one in Old Greenwich that I know of. I think there's one also in Cos Cob. And it just seems to me that it's a little bit too much. I understand that we have to have some low-income housing, absolutely necessary. But what recommendation would you give to the RTM, in my estimation, for an overgrowth of 830s in our area?
It's never a good sign when a state code has become common parlance, as 830G has, and now it's basically a four-letter word. 4 digits. I think the RTM was correct on Monday night to pass the state of the sense of the meeting resolution advocating for reform of 830G on the state level. At the beginning of the session in February, I submitted legislation proposing to reform 830G in a way that I think creates a sensible way forward. Again, that allows Greenwich and other municipalities to achieve affordable housing goals, but do so with more local buy-in and input in a pragmatic way that balances all considerations and that makes sure that the affordable housing that's developed is in the scale and in the style of the towns. So that means like all affordable housing based on simply its affordability should be counted as affordable. That also means it encourages all different types of affordable housing, not just highly dense developments that are like 190 units in an ugly concrete building. I think that's what most people are really offended by. They're offended by the brutalist kind of like developments and monstrosities that they think offend the sensibilities of a bucolic New England town. They like the idea of affordable housing. They understand that it's expensive to live here. Although the housing values in Connecticut since 830G passed, like 30 years ago, have appreciated less than anywhere else in the country. It's really the biggest problem of affordability and economic opportunity is jobs and income growth. But putting that aside, Greenwich, I think, cares a lot about achieving its affordable housing goals, as evidenced by the renovations of Armstrong Court, the creation of the new housing trust. Governor Lamont, when he came to the ribbon cutting for Armstrong Court, says Greenwich does a good job. Even the most vocal activist for some of these changes at the state level, Sarah Bronin, has admitted that Greenwich does a pretty good job compared to other towns. The problem is that the law does not accurately reflect what towns are doing and the affordable housing that's created, because it creates a very convoluted methodology for counting what's affordable or what's not. We should simply allow towns, or give towns the option and the ability to count things that are verifiably affordable based simply on the rate of rent. And that also would allow them to encourage different types of affordable housing to be developed that is more within the liking of the town and has more local buy-in. So I think there is a targeted and pragmatic way forward that can bring people together. Unfortunately, it seems like the leadership of the state government doesn't have an appetite for any change on the matter. My bill was obviously killed, died a painful death, and it seems like even more efforts to undermine local control over planning and zoning are actually coming down the pike. That's what the testimony before the Land Use Committee of the state government was all about on Monday or Tuesday for hours and hours with some consternation. So this is a live issue. It's going to continue to be a live issue. But again, I and people who are sympathetic to this point of view, again, across party lines, including our Democratic state representative who spoke to you a couple weeks ago, thinks that there should be a reform of 830G. It needs to change. There's a better way forward. There's a pragmatic way forward. And again, I think that's what the legislation I submitted in February represents, but this is a state issue. I think the people locally are doing a good job. Now it's a matter of changing leadership or hearts and minds in the state government.
Ryan, thanks for being here. I want to change subjects, although I was interested in your response. Don't give up submitting bills. That's what you're there for. I want to talk about gun control. I'm curious to know your position on gun control. Are you satisfied with it? And if it needed to be changed, and you're in a position to achieve something, what would you change?
So the trends in violent crime over the past couple of years are really quite shocking. As I mentioned before, a 30% increase in homicides in 2020, a 30% increase in homicides in 2021. It seems like the nationwide rate is going to be like 7% or 8% in 2021. So now Connecticut is really, the trends in Connecticut are really surpassing the rest of the country. That's pretty alarming. It's pretty alarming, especially because Connecticut's gun control laws are consistently ranked the strictest in the country. I think we have an enforcement problem, a law enforcement problem. We basically totally robbed police of important abilities to take illegal guns off the street over the last couple of years with the police reform law. For instance, it eliminated something called consent searches, which was an important tool that police used to take hundreds of illegal guns off the street in Connecticut. I know there's talk, for instance, from the governor of an Office of Gun Violence Prevention, but I mean, isn't that what the police is? But we've totally tied the hands of police and inhibited them from enforcing the law, which already says that these guns are illegal, that people are using to commit crimes, and is used to take illegal guns off the street. So I think we need to implement proactive policing policy to enforce the existing gun laws, to keep guns out of the hands of criminals and protect communities, rather than making more laws that nobody follows, and they don't follow them. And a detective just the other week was telling me that we have half of the criminal laws in the state we don't even enforce. It seems like we need rule of law, we need simplicity, and we need to actually enforce laws that keep guns out of the hands of people who are convicted criminals or a clear danger to themselves and others. That can be done with a lot of the reforms that I and people in my caucus have advocated for. This is a totally solvable problem. This problem is actually a total consequence of bad government policy in recent years by itself. I think it is one of the most easily fixable problems with basically 5 or 6 different policy reforms on the state level. And it's really, I think, shocking and horrible, the violence that we've seen in our cities over the past couple of years. In the last 9 days, there's been 6, my understanding is that there's been 7 shootings in the last 10 days in Stamford. Just the last 10 days. It's one of the safest cities in the country traditionally, with one of the best police forces in the entire country. I mean, this is coming to our back door. It's a scandal, it's horrible, but it can be fixed by addressing the mistakes that the state government has been making over just the past couple of years.
Ryan, you've made a good case about the high cost of living in Connecticut and the need to make it more affordable. And you've talked about affordable housing. There was a story in the Greenwich Times today about a college student, at a public hearing, was talking about the need for public housing, affordable public housing near the railroad stations in each community, so you could be within walking distance. And he was saying how young people you want in Connecticut, really can't afford to live here. What do you think of the idea of more inexpensive housing, in the center of our towns, our cities, near the transportation centers?
My expertise is not in town planning, so I don't know that I feel totally comfortable, telling towns what I think is the best strategy on that front. I think that they can make those decisions effectively on their own. Stamford might have a slightly different answer than Fairfield, but I do trust local leaders with an expertise in the area to make these decisions wisely rather than the state necessarily dictating to the localities. But on the issue of young people coming to and living in Connecticut, the biggest reason that they're not is because there are no jobs here compared to the rest of the country. I mean, in the end of the day, it's a demand problem for labor rather than a supply problem on the housing front or anything else. I mean, that's the reason why we've seen the fourth lowest population growth over the last 10 years in the country, because we have fewer jobs than we did in 1997. And some of these horrible regulations that make it impossible on small businesses, which create more than half the jobs and have a more difficult time navigating the regulations and the tax structure, which is so convoluted in our state and so burdensome in our state, is that there are no jobs for young people, people who are starting out, who are on the first rung of life's ladder. And ultimately, that's why I'm advocating for the reforms, because those are the people I'm most concerned about, because those are the people I want to see come to Connecticut, get a job, thrive, have a family, raise a family here. And those are the changes I think can make that more likely to happen.
Thank you. So we're going to end now. There's a certificate of appreciation for you, Ryan.
Thank you.
Really appreciate you adjusting your schedule for us. And we'll let you go now. Godspeed. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone.